church parking lot, a woman is found murdered. The killer leaves few clues and no weapon. A routine suicide investigation takes a macabre twist. Can a camera prove this was murder? And a fire rages in a nursing home, killing 15 residents. Armed only with his photographs, it will take the coroner 6 years to prove this tragedy was no accident. Forensic photographers solved these crimes by preserving crucial details missed by the naked eye. After the evidence is erased, the new detectives must rely on camera clues. In Fairfax County, Virginia, in March 1989, a man called police to report a woman had fallen in an icy church parking lot. An officer reported back from the scene. The woman didn't slip and fall. She was murdered. At police headquarters, forensic photographer Jeff Miller knew he had a long night ahead of him. He packed his equipment and got ready to meet investigators gathering at the scene. Where some officers shoot criminals, Miller shoots film. In his 18 years with the Fairfax Police, he has witnessed countless crime scenes through his lens. If he is the eyes of law enforcement, then his photos are its long-term memory.
Hey, this is the ID we got off of the victim.
Investigators arrived at the parking lot and planned their strategy. Detective Ed Guckenberger headed the investigation. As his team uncovered clues, they depended on Miller. It's in Miller's camera that all the clues come together to solve a case and hopefully to catch a killer.
We want to be able to document the scene, in essence, take the scene from here to the courthouse just exactly the same way that we find it.
Miller began by mapping the crime scene. The initial clues were both simple and brutal. The victim was lying face up in a pool of her own blood. She had been shot several times, with the fatal bullet to her head. Nearby, her purse was found untouched. Robbery was not the motive. Miller first documented the wide view of the crime scene, which was blanketed in darkness. To bring it into focus, Miller used a technique called painting with light. The camera was mounted on a tripod. Its shutter kept open as an assistant covered the lens. The same frame of film was exposed repeatedly as Miller passed along the edges of the scene, firing his flash as many as 24 times for a single picture. Each flash illuminates a slightly different area. This photograph is the result of Miller's work. The bright lights look like street lamps, but they were made by Miller's flash. Though he was holding the flash as it fired, Miller doesn't appear because he was behind the light. He remained invisible as he exposed the evidence. After Miller took his wide shot by painting with light, he moved in to photograph every detail of the scene. He worked his way closer and closer to the victim, documenting her wounds and the position of her body.
You guys see these bloody tire tracks?
Miller discovered some bloody tire tracks near the victim.
It looks like when the vehicle left here, it ran through the pool of blood.
Officers were sent to follow the trail, while others stayed behind to comb for additional clues. Miller found 2 bullet casings. the man who called the police parked his van over them. Miller photographed the evidence where it lay. Moving the van again would only have disturbed more of the crime scene.
Hey guys.
As Miller hunted for additional evidence, officers returned from their search of the neighborhood. They found an abandoned car a block away. They ran the tags. It was registered to the victim's address. The site of the car became a second crime scene. Again, Miller photographed the scene from every angle, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain how the woman ended up so far from her vehicle. As he did at the church parking lot, Miller first photographed the site at a distance, then moved in for close-ups. The driver's side window was shattered. Pellets of glass were strewn about the car's interior. A spent cartridge lay in the snow outside the driver's side door, and a bullet was lodged in the plastic molding. On the passenger's side, Miller found even more. Pressed into the thin snow were footprints, too big to be the victim's. Forensic technicians have a tough time making casts of snowy tracks, and Miller knew the prints would melt with the rising sun. So it was up to him and his camera to preserve the evidence before it faded away.
You can cut it out if it's in ice and try to keep it at a certain temperature and everything else. Well, I guess sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There are different chemicals that you could possibly spray on it to try and keep it. When all in all is said and done, the photograph is the only evidence that was able to totally keep that impression intact.
The search of the neighborhood uncovered more potential evidence. A patrolman found a second car abandoned a half-mile from the church parking lot after apparently skidding off the road. The second car became the third crime scene during this night of sporadic clues. Police began to search for a connection. On the seat, an officer found a leather gun holster. He ran the tags on the vehicle. The owner lived just 2 doors from the victim.
Process this scene.
At dawn, Jeff Miller inspected the church parking lot again. He hoped the sun would shed new light on the case. By now, the snow had melted.
We wanted to come back and check the asphalt parking lot and make sure that we collected all the evidence. We don't want to leave anything behind. Once we leave here, you can't come back.
His effort paid off. Daylight revealed fragments of glass buried in the snow the night before. If the glass matched the broken window in the victim's car, police could say the car was in the parking lot when she was killed.
Okay, there's something over here.
The melting snow also revealed a bullet at the edge of the lot.
So tell you what, let me get a couple pictures of it first.
Tests would determine if it matched the bullet found in the victim's car. While Miller checked the parking lot, Ed Guckenberger hit the road. His first stop, the victim's house. In homicide cases, family members are usually the first suspects.
I have to read very quickly once I knock on that door the type of response that I get from that person who opens it. And in this case, I had a husband that was dressed in a bathrobe that I had woken up out of his sleep. We stated that His wife should have been home, and she was at a church meeting. As a homicide investigator, what you then have to do is you have to read that person. Does he seem sincere? Is this some ploy or something else? Well, there was nothing from what he was telling me to show that he was in any way involved in this.
Confident the husband wasn't involved with the woman's murder, officers followed their next lead. They didn't have far to go. The owner of the second car was the victim's neighbor. He was also no stranger to police. The churchyard murder investigation was less than 10 hours old. So far, Detective Guckenberger had no suspects. His only lead was the owner of the second car. The man police wanted to talk with was Gary Asa Donahue. Ed Guckenberger asked him to come to the station for questioning. To his buddies in his motorcycle gang, Donahue was known as Redneck. Police knew him by his criminal record. Donahue told police he'd been out drinking the night before. When he got home, he realized his dog was loose, so he drove around to look for it. He lost control of his car on the icy road and skidded into a ditch. Unable to get free, Donahue said he walked home. Although his route would have taken him past the victim's car, Donahue told police he didn't see it. He said the holster in his own car belonged to a friend, but he didn't have the gun. Police were suspicious. They asked Donahue for his jacket and boots, which might hold clues that told a different story. Donahue willingly surrendered them. In the darkroom, Miller developed one of his most hopeful leads. Up until now, he'd been merely documenting the various crime scenes. Now, he put his darkroom skills to the test to flush out latent clues. Using the ruler he placed by the icy footprints when he snapped the photo, Miller created a life-size portrait of the prints. A boot print can be almost as telling as a fingerprint, if it's clear enough. Miller was happy with the photo. Armed with this image, it became just a matter of matching the prints to the boots that made them. Miller sent his photographs to a forensic lab for a detailed comparison with Donahue's boots. Lab technicians first examined the size of the boots. If the prints are off, even by a few millimeters, there is no match. The tread pattern was examined next. Technicians pored over the sole of the boot, making sure that every detail matched Miller's photograph. So far, so good. But next came the litmus test, matching the boot to the foot that wore it. It required a close look at the boot's anatomical wear.
Anatomical wear is the wear that each of us impart into the bottom of the shoe based on how tall we are, how much we weigh, our bone makeup, how we walk, whether we walk on the inside of our feet, the outside of our feet, more so on the heel, more so on the toe.
Donahue wore a lift in one of his boots. It added to the unique anatomical wear and left its signature in the boot prints. Last, technicians examined the boots and the photographs for accidental wear and tear, nicks and cuts from daily use.
In this particular case, there are certain marks, certain cuts, certain indentations in the tread pattern that the examiner was able to see in the photograph and was able to find also in the shoe, that he's able to say that this shoe made this impression to the exclusion of all the other shoes in the whole wide world.
The footprint evidence placed Donahue at the victim's car. Guckenberger credits the photographs with keeping the investigation on track.
If We didn't have the photographs of that shoe impression. Then we're mainly just stuck with firearms evidence. A person might have a gun, but who actually shoots that gun? But this person wears his own boots.
Investigators then examined Donahue's jacket, combing it meticulously for fibers, hair, cloth, anything that might link Donahue to the victim. They found glass particles. What new information could they provide? Forensic tests determined the glass from the victim's car matched the glass in the parking lot. If the glass from Donahue's jacket matched these samples, it would place Donahue at the site where the car window was shattered and where the victim was killed. The glass matched. Police could now prove that Donahue was in the parking lot and maybe in the car at the time of the murder. The bloody tire tracks were the next link. Because the victim couldn't have driven through her own blood, investigators were able to show she was killed in the parking lot and that somebody else moved her car.
As her car was leaving the scene, it drove through a pool of blood that was coming from her. The blood adhered to the tire, and the rotation of the tire through the parking lot kept leaving a blood transfer onto the ground. And so that's what that was from.
The scattered clues were coming together, thanks in large part to Miller's accurate documentation of the scene. The only thing missing was the murder weapon. To help pinpoint it, investigators tested the bullets and casings found near the victim and her car. Another casing was found in Donahue's car. Lab tests showed all the casings were fired from a rare Hungarian pistol, a 9mm auto-loading Fromer, a gun that peaked in popularity around World War II. Tests of the impression on the holster from Donahue's car matched the impression a Fromer would make. But the gun was nowhere to be found. Police scoured the area and came up empty. Donahue, for all his earlier cooperation, drew the line at providing the gun, swearing he never had it.
And he probably thought that whatever he did with this gun, and I don't know, we never did find that gun, probably thought that he was past all this. That if we didn't have a gun, we probably could not prove that he was the one that actually fired the shot or did anything else.
But if there ever was a smoking gun in this case, it was Miller's photographs of the boot prints, something Donahue didn't count on. Officer Miller and Detective Guckenberger began to build their case. With the glass fragments, the shell casings, the bullets, and the ever-important boot prints, they were confident they could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Gary Asa Donahue was a killer.
Okay, great.
Miller's photographs became primary evidence before a grand jury, which sent back Donahue's indictment. The photographic clues that Miller provided helped piece together the story of that ill-fated night.
Okay, what I believe happened is that Mr. Donahue's driving down the street. He turns down the wrong street to go to his house, probably because he's drunk.
Donahue lost control of his car and slid off the road. Angry, he got out of the car and began to walk home. As the victim came down the street, she recognized the car. She likely had seen it in her neighborhood for years. Donahue bought it from another neighbor.
Perhaps she's acting as a good Samaritan. She stops to offer him a ride, or perhaps he stepped out on the road and flagged her down. The other possibility is he stepped out on the road with a gun and made her stop for him. They go down the street to the church parking lot. Something occurs inside the car in the church. I don't know what that is. In homicide investigation, you're not always going to be able to answer every single question that you have. She falls down to the ground, lays down on her back, face up. Donahue then has a better target, a non-moving target. He then advances towards her, and as she's lying there on the ground, he puts the gun right up to her face almost and executes her. He then leaves the scene, drives down to the end of the street, where again, for whatever reason, he runs off the road, probably due to his intoxication, runs off the road, wrecks it into the trees. For whatever reason, he decides to clear his weapon. He works the action, the one cartridge casing that's still in the gun, ejects out the broken driver's window, and is found on the ground next to the vehicle.
For whatever reason, he slid across the seat and left by the passenger's side, leaving his boot prints in the snow.
This is your worst type of killer, because this is the person that kills out of meanness. There was no reason at all to kill this woman. She was not, your victim that puts herself in a situation because of a crime. She's not that type of person. She's the type of person that her innocence is what got her into trouble. That day, she ran across an animal.
Gary Asa Donahue was sentenced to life in prison. The senseless death of the woman in the church parking lot shocked the residents of her quiet community. Further south, in Miami, Florida, murder is more common, but no less shocking. Through these doors at the Metro-Dade County Morgue in Florida come every kind of death, both natural and unnatural. As bodies come into the morgue, it's the job of forensic photographers to document wounds and other identifying traits before the corpses are stored. The work is never routine and often tragic. On this day, a 5-year-old girl is the victim of a random shooting. She was caught in crossfire during a parade. Forensic technicians examine her wounds. Perhaps they hold the key to the killer. Dade County detectives rely on the information to start their investigation.
We are trying to determine, number one, what caliber of round it was that did strike the victim. And number two, the path of the bullet as it entered the body and then exited. That will help us in trying to determine possibly who our shooter is.
In the medical examiner's office, high-tech photography is as much a tool of the trade as a scalpel. If a death looks suspicious, it's up to forensic photographers to document the details. They start with the wound and then photograph individual organs as the autopsy proceeds. These gruesome photographs survive long after a case is closed. They provide a visual database authorities can refer to if a similar case comes up. Knowing what to look for streamlines any investigation. In 1986, Dade County Police responded to a suicide. Jack Sebastian lay dead, a 12-gauge shotgun by his side. When death is involved, it's standard procedure to capture everything on film.
Did you see anyone enter or leave the house?
The victim's girlfriend told police she was outside when she heard the blast.
I wanted to get everything.
Sebastian left no note. At the morgue, a staff member felt suspicious about Sebastian's wound and called medical examiner Jay Barnhart.
Good morning, Dr. Alvarez. What do you have?
This case came in as a
Barnhart mapped and measured the wound.
Which appears
In his initial opinion, this was no suicide. Sebastian was shot almost directly between the eyes. His wound was surrounded by stippling, small speckled burns made by the gunpowder exploding from the shotgun's muzzle. If Sebastian held the gun directly to his head, the gunpowder wouldn't have marked his face. From the stippling, Barnhart knew the gun must have been held some distance from Sebastian's forehead when he pulled the trigger. Something wasn't right, and Barnhart was determined to get to the bottom of it. First, Barnhart ordered photographs of Sebastian's wounds. Then he took X-rays of Sebastian's head to reveal the internal damage he couldn't see. The X-ray showed the path of the pellets.
This is an X-ray showing the dispersion of the birdshot through the skull. And if we take the point of entrance, which is just above the bridge of the nose, and connect that by an imaginary line or series of lines to the location of the pellets, we see that the pellets are to the left and below the point of entrance, meaning that the shot then was coming from above and to the right of the entrance.
Barnhart had to find out if Sebastian could hold the gun at the angle indicated by the X-ray. It wouldn't have been easy. Investigators even placed the shotgun in the extended arms of Sebastian's corpse to see if he could fire the gun. His fingers could barely reach the trigger. Considering all possibilities, investigators tried to fire the gun with their feet. They found they could do it with bare toes. But Sebastian wore round-toed boots, making it impossible for him to fire the gun. These extreme tests were necessary. Barnhart knew that in court, he must be prepared to answer even the strangest questions.
They'll ask you things like, well, couldn't he have been laying in bed and have his foot up over his head and pulled it with his... and if he had not been wearing shoes, you'd probably have to say, yes, he could.
Barnhart wasn't satisfied with his findings. He needed to determine the distance between Sebastian and the gun when it fired. Barnhart and his staff shot a piece of poster board from distances of 1 to 7 feet and examined the damage. From 1 foot away, the force of the shot cracked the board. The impact was enormous. At 2 feet, the impact was less severe as the buckshot began to spread. At 4 feet, the hole roughly doubled in size as the pellets fanned out. At 6 feet from the board, the buckshot dispersed further, leaving clear pellet marks. Barnhart concluded the muzzle of the gun had to be at least 1.5 feet away from Sebastian's head. He was convinced someone else must have pulled the trigger. But Barnhart feared his simple test wasn't enough to sway a jury. He turned to the Forensic Imaging Bureau for help. Todd Reeves runs Dade County's Forensic Imaging Bureau, one of the best in the United States. The Bureau has more than 3,000 square feet of advanced photographic equipment. The well-equipped studios can document huge pieces of evidence while capturing clues invisible to the naked eye. Here, a technician uses a microscope-equipped camera to examine a cast of a jawbone. Her findings will help match a suspect to a bite mark. A potentially useful image may come from a less than perfect source, like a security camera or shot from a moving vehicle. The lab can clean up, enlarge, and enhance photographs. Computers reveal unseen details in evidence photos, bringing clues into focus. A huge computer database of fingerprints can match even the vaguest finger smudge. An editing suite helps investigators assemble persuasive courtroom presentations.
The higher the quality, the better delineation you're giving the jury, the more factual information. And that's what we're providing is fact, not fiction. And that's the true message behind professional forensic photography.
Jay Barnhart knew he had a case for the murder of Jack Sebastian. But he'd rely on Reeves and his high-tech tools to make it bulletproof.
We've got a case of this biker.
Every fatal wound tells a tale. In the case of Jack Sebastian, the injuries around the wound completed the story. When a gun fires, it shoots more than projectiles. From the muzzle comes a flash of fire, a blast of gas, a puff of smoke, and a shower of sparks. Each can leave its mark. Place the muzzle of a gun directly against the target, and all this debris goes into the wound. Pull the muzzle further away, and the debris becomes more and more dispersed. The forensic photographs of Sebastian's injuries showed the stippling wounds. They also revealed bruising under the eyes, on the nose, and on the cheek. Barnhart believed the damage was caused by the open petals of the shot cup, a plastic sleeve that holds the buckshot. But how far away would the shotgun have to be to allow the shot cup petals to open? Barnhart and Reeves believed high-speed photography could provide the definitive answer.
And it allows the doctors and the police that are investigating the case to be able to see things we can't see with the human eye, things that are moving as fast as Mach 15.
High-speed photography can stop a bullet in midair. More than that, it allows investigators to examine, frame by frame, the impact and damage that bullet produces as it connects with its target. Wounds can then be matched with bullets. In cases where no weapon is found or a bullet isn't recovered, a series of high-speed photos may help investigators make the identification. Reeves and Barnhart designed an experiment to determine the distance between Sebastian's head and the muzzle of the gun that killed him.
I don't know if there's any, I think we have film in the 35.
Crank it in there after it's in the vise.
They mounted a shotgun on a rack, held perfectly level. Next, they positioned two cameras along the line of fire. As the shell and debris left the muzzle, they would fly past the cameras, which would snap their picture. It was crucial that the gun not move when fired. They loaded the gun with the same type of ammunition that killed Sebastian.
Let it go.
Fire in the hole. Okay.
Reeves then placed a sensitive microphone near the muzzle of the gun. When the microphone picks up the sound of the shotgun blast, it trips a flash unit. A ruler placed behind the microphone measures how far the shell travels as the shot cup petals begin to open. The high-speed flash fires for 1/2 millionth of a second, necessary when photographing at blazing speeds. For the clearest image, Reeves and Barnhart need the camera to be as close to the flying shell as possible, but must determine the best place to put it. They first try the test with a large format Polaroid camera. The fast-developing film allows them to take test photos of the experiment so they can position the second camera correctly. For the actual test, they use a standard 35mm camera with highly sensitive film to freeze the shell in its path. The investigators are now ready to try their experiment and catch a shell with a flash of light. If all goes well, they'll produce an irrefutable record of the shell and its components in flight. Barnhart can then use the information to verify where the plastic petals on the shot cup began to open into the pattern that damaged Sebastian's face. Each time the gun is fired, Reeves inches the microphone away from the muzzle. As a result, the flash will go off a little later. The projectile will travel a little farther. The camera will catch it as it opens in flight. Initially, the white-hot plastic shot cup hasn't expanded. After 18 inches, the petals begin to spread, discharging the pellets and falling away. At about 30 inches, the petals have fully opened. Barnhart and Reeves succeed in making a photographic point-by-point map of a shotgun shell's trajectory. By comparing the wound with the pictures, investigators determined the gun was fired from a distance of 18 to 24 inches from Sebastian's face.
Expand our database here.
The results corroborated Barnhart's own experiments and gave him the evidence he needed to prove Sebastian couldn't have possibly shot himself. Police then confronted Sebastian's girlfriend, Diane Shelton, with the evidence. She confessed to pulling the trigger and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Unlike any other tool, forensic photography can expose evidence that would otherwise have been missed. And sometimes, photographs are the only way to prove a crime was committed at all. When a Pennsylvania coroner was certain a tragic accident camouflaged a mass murder, his photographs became his only allies. Forensic photography played a crucial role in the investigation of a devastating fire in a nursing home. Retired Wayne County, Pennsylvania coroner Robert Jennings spent 6 years trying to prove the fiery deaths were no accident. Jennings has spent much of his life combining his role as coroner and his love of photography. He has been snapping shots for more than 45 years.
We got some fire to the left here. Let's go knock that down before we go in.
His story begins on the grim night of October 19, 1971. A fire killed all 15 residents of the Geiger nursing home, a private home attached to a farmhouse near Honesdale, Pennsylvania. Most of the victims were found in their beds, dead from smoke inhalation. A few were overcome as they crawled on the floor. As coroner, Jennings rushed to the scene. State police and firefighters had begun removing bodies before Jennings had a chance to document the area. After asking the firemen to stop, Jennings began photographing all he could. The location of the victims could prove important. Jennings tried to track the blaze with his camera lens inside the pitch-dark building. Time was of the essence. He went right to work, hoping his pictures could help determine what caused the blaze. But the darkness and smoke foiled his efforts. Reluctantly, he went home to await the sunrise. By the time he returned the next morning, the smoke had cleared and the gloom had lifted enough for him to get his shots of the ruins.
If your normal f-stop would be f11, then you would have to open up at least 2 more stops and give it more light to get the detail and so forth that's needed in this type of evidence photography, that at least arson experts have an opportunity to examine the charring and so forth.
Working in the crumbling shell of the building was time-consuming and treacherous. But Jennings was determined to commit every inch of the wreckage to film. He succeeded. Painting with light revealed details of an alligator burn, a charring pattern similar to the rough scales of the reptile. The pattern is created at very high temperatures. By illuminating the area from several angles, Jennings photographed the changes in the burn pattern. Later, he would refer to his photographs to trace the fire's path. Burn patterns on the walls suggested the blaze tore through the hallway. A section of the corridor was almost totally consumed. In one spot, the fire burned a hole in the floor. The destruction at this spot was unlike anywhere else in the building. Jennings focused his attention and his camera on the hole. He crawled under it, photographing its edges. Fires usually burn from the bottom up, igniting whatever's above them. But at this spot, the fire looked to have burned from the top down. To Jennings, that suggested an accelerant was used, some flammable liquid that seeped through the floor, carrying flames with it. Before Jennings completed his investigation, state police announced their findings. They concluded the fire began in the laundry room, caused by a bad thermocoupling in a clothes dryer. Jennings wasn't buying it. He'd spend the next 6 years trying to prove them wrong. Photographs were Jennings' only clues. The ceiling above the dryer where the state police said the fire started showed minimal damage compared to the highly charred hallway. The wires in the laundry room were still intact. Jennings even found unburned clothing inside the dryer. Picture by picture, he continued building his case. Today, a quarter century later, Jennings' evidence remains, though the building is long gone.
Within a few weeks after the fire, the building is totally destroyed and demolished, razed. So therefore, the evidence that I photographed, that's gone. And if you don't have the photographs there to support, to look it over, it's pretty hard to solve a crime.
For Jennings, not much has changed in the art and science of photography since he snapped his first picture. Today, as he did 25 years ago in the Geiger nursing home case, he processes his own photographs by hand, carefully controlling every step of exposure, developing, and printing. He sharpened his skills, both as a photographer and an investigator. He's gained a better sense of what to look for and how to capture it on film. A charred piece of timber, a pile of debris. These seemingly trivial objects can be clues that make or break a case. Jennings has to be sure no detail is overlooked. An investigation is a lot like a roll of exposed film. All the information is there. You just have to know how to make it visible. In his darkroom, Jennings exposes many secrets. And in the process, he sometimes develops even more questions. State police were impressed by Jennings' photographs, but still wouldn't concede the fire was arson. They didn't waver for one simple reason: no suspect. If the fire had been deliberately set, who lit the match? In the end, Jennings' pictures exposed him. Hoping to prove the fire was deliberately set, Jennings turned to Nurse Vaudine Lyon, the sole survivor of the blaze. She told him about one of the home's gentlest patients, Mr. Maurice Flynn. Mr. Flynn, a deeply shy and private man, would end each day in his room, reading the Bible by candlelight. So it was odd that after the fire, Flynn's body was found seated in the room of a married couple. He was the only patient not in his own room when the fire occurred. He was also the only patient found completely naked. Scarcely burned, he died seated in a chair with his arms and legs extended, as though crucified.
He was known as the gentleman of the house. He was there to help people, but he was very private. He wouldn't even leave a nurse or anyone with him when he's taking a shower. He just didn't want any help. And this was always a puzzling part as to why this particular person was found this distance away.
Flynn's own room was some 60 feet from where his body was found. The smoke and flame would have made that simple walk impossible. Jennings determined the blaze started at the intersection of the hallways. In order for Flynn to get to the couple's room during the fire, he would have had to pass right through it. On the other hand, if he wanted to escape the blaze, the exit was near his room, easily within his reach.
And it's impossible that he could have come down that distance and through that T intersection with the type of physical evidence that we found on his body, because he would have never made it, and he would have been completely charred.
Jennings wondered why Flynn was so far from his room while most everyone else died in bed from the fast-spreading blaze. On June 8, 1972, Robert Jennings exhumed the body of Maurice Flynn. Even before the autopsy, Jennings noticed something odd. Flynn's skin was almost cherry red, indicating carbon monoxide poisoning. The autopsy showed Flynn's lung tissue had absorbed gasoline vapors shortly before he died. More clues came out during Lyon's interview. Flynn was the only resident in the home allowed to have matches to light the candles by which he read his Bible. He also mowed the lawn around the nursing home, making him one of the only residents with access to gasoline. Flynn behaved strangely the day before the fire, ranting and citing biblical verse. The home's other residents also acted strangely. They paid off forgotten debts and talked of a journey to a better place.
Everything centered around the strange events of Mr. Flynn, why he was completely naked. One of his comments to one of the nurses on duty that day was that you come in this world naked and you leave it naked. And that stuck in our minds a lot with finding his completely nude body.
It looked like Jennings had his suspect. But state police wouldn't revise their conclusions. Jennings persisted. By early 1975, Jennings was confident that he had enough evidence to prove his case. He exercised his powers as coroner and swore in a jury of 6 men and women. He presented his findings while the state police defended their position during the 2-day legal battle. Afterward, the jury concluded the fire was caused by an illegal act by a person or persons unknown. They ruled that investigators should attempt to discover who caused the 15 deaths. Why Flynn set the fire will never be known. Some have speculated that his actions were the result of a deranged mind. Others have said Flynn and the other nursing home residents had all agreed to die, thinking it better to end their lives than live in the home. In the end, the closest we may ever come to finding out the cause of the fire lies in Jennings' photographs and his efforts at solving this crime. After the coroner jury's verdict, Jennings filled out the death certificates of the residents of the Geiger nursing home. 14 homicides and a suicide.
It was worth the effort. I felt that I had a duty to represent the other 14 people that paid a price their lives in this particular incident, and particularly for the families as well.
Forensic photography is the new detective's secret weapon. Often overlooked, it is crucial in a criminal investigation. Through sophisticated camera equipment, determination, and ingenuity, forensic photographers become the eyes and memories of investigators. They are also the advocates of the victims, helping bring criminals to justice.